Hey everybody, welcome to the wonderful world of Remnant Radio. In this program, we've got a crossover with Blurry Creatures and the Remnant guys. It's going to be an exciting program. You stay tuned. You are watching The Remnant Radio, a show where we tackle history, theology, and the gifts of the Spirit. My name is Joshua Lewis, and I'm the pastor of King's Fellowship Church in Ada, Oklahoma. Together with my friends, Michael Miller, the pastor of Reclamation Church Denver, and Michael Roundtree, who's heading up Convergence OKC, we set aside time every week to discuss the gifts of the Spirit. We talk about things like how do you pray for the sick, how do you interpret tongues, and should you believe every prophetic word for the new year. If you're interested in a charismatic podcast with practitioners who are actually doing the stuff, this is the show for you. Sorry for the late run for some of you guys who are in the live section going, hey, where are you at? Why is the show not on? Sometimes you get into technical glitches when you have these kinds of crossovers, but we're really excited to have the Blurry Creature guys on with us. We're going to dive into a little bit of their background, some of how they started their podcast, and then we're going to talk about all things, I want to say paranormal, and might not be the right word for it, but things pertaining to these kinds of mythical and blurry creatures, if you will, what they really are, all that fun stuff we're going to be diving into today. But before we do that, I want to remind you that our program today is brought to you in part by Logos Bible Software. I really encourage you to go check out the Logos software. It's really easy to use. I never write a sermon or even do show notes without checking out Logos Bible Software. They didn't have anything for blurry creatures, oddly enough, but I encourage you to go check out their website. They have pricing starting as low as $9.99 a month if you want to check out their new subscription platform, and you can use the promo code Remnant. I think you go to logos.com/remnant and you can start a 60-day trial for free. So very much encourage you to do that, and we thank you for Logos for sponsoring this episode. But without further ado, I want to introduce to my partner in crime, my co-host for today's program, Michael Miller. How are you doing over there in Denver, Colorado?
Dude, fantastic. Just got back from Delaware. Saw a really sweet little healing young guy. He, from age 10 to 15, had been puking almost every day, and went over to the parents' house. They probably had no idea what I was about to do. There's a whole group that was there gathered. I start diving in with all the weird demonization questions, and sure enough, cast a demon out of him. He got healed, and they baptized him on Sunday. So fun weekend. Glad to be back home. Got ETS this week, the Evangelical Theological Society, of which, Josh, you should be joining, but you're bailing on me for the first time.
Too busy. Don't want to do it. I love ETS. It is the Justice League for Bible nerds. If you guys don't know what ETS is, it is all of the great scholars and theologians from all over the world get together and they nerd out over textual criticism and Greek grammar and syntax, and you can buy a bunch of really cheap books. Very much encourage people to go to those every time that they happen. It's every year in November. My October, I traveled almost every week, and I'd rather not neglect my children. So I decided not to go to ETS this year. Glad that you get to go, Miller. Hope you enjoy it for all of us. Without further ado, I want to introduce you to our guests, the hosts of the Blurry Creatures podcast. I'm going to toss it over to you guys. Tell us a little about yourself and your ministry for people who aren't familiar with you.
Hey, my name is Nate Henry. I was born in 1980. As you can tell.
That's good.
And co-host Blurry Creatures podcast. And we've been going since 2020, and we've been having a lot of fun getting blurry, and mostly blurry. And oftentimes we get into theological discussions on our show, but I think we try to stick around in the middle somewhere, and we have a lot of fun with what we're doing here.
Yeah. And I'm Luke Rodgers. We're both from Northern California. I know that's probably one of the origin stories. Both of us grew up in NorCal. Both of us live in Tennessee now. We grew up in the church. Nate was talking pre-roll about being in carpet league basketball. I did not go to Christian high school. I actually wanted to play sports, so we did that. But yeah, great to be on the show. Thanks for having us.
I rode the bench at a D1 school. So yeah. Let's just be clear here. Didn't play, but I got on the team. That's hard enough as it is.
Proud
these
of you.
days.
Proud of you.
That's juniors.
For you guys.
We don't back down.
I'm curious. Do you guys come from a particular Christian tradition? Where are you? What's your background?
Well, I grew up in a CMA church, so Christian Missionary Alliance. It was, since that's where I accepted Christ when I was 4 on Easter, I went with my parents. It felt a little more like non-denominational than denominational. Probably in the late 90s, had a lot of charismatic influence. We had all of the speaking in tongues and folks getting slain in the spirit. I was a rebellious teenager at that point and never was slain in the spirit, didn't let him push me over. I was telling the story recently.
Good for you.
That stuff was going on in the late 90s, right? Like, and I think it ended up in our church, and but wonderful church, neighborhood church in Chico. Actually, my youth pastor when I was there is now the head pastor. Great church, still going. It's a big gold dome. And love it. I loved growing up there.
I grew up Southern Baptist, exact opposite. So, different Baptist churches, different backgrounds. I think mostly the Christian school I went to was Baptist, but I was always involved in other Christian organizations. Worked for Young Life for a little while. Worked at a camp. So I was always around like a bunch of different types of Christians coming together and sort of having a common purpose. Didn't really feel like I stuck around in the Baptist space for very long, but quickly realized
where
that
did you do Young Life.
I did too. Actually.
San Luis Obispo, California.
Okay. I was in Dallas. I did Young Life. I was on staff for a couple years there. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Both of you did Young Life.
I went to Young Life. I went to Young Life because the girls went to Young Life in high school.
There you go.
That's exactly why I went.
That's how they hook you.
But I was a YWAMer. We're going to talk about weird. I went to YWAM after college and did a DTS, a type of training school in Australia. Then I spent 3 months in Southeast Asia. Lived in an orphanage in Thailand. Saw people get radically healed. Amazing stuff that really changed the trajectory of my life doing that. And that was, most people do that before they go to college. I was pre-med and needed some time from burnout. Obviously didn't go to med school, but wanted to spend some time for the Lord and ended up doing YWAM. So I know those aren't the same things, but no, Young Life, I was a participant, not a leader.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's great. Well, tell us a little bit about the podcast, Blurry Creatures. People who aren't familiar with the program, you guys are very popular. You guys have got a great channel that's kind of up and coming. I've heard from Miller, you guys are like deeply inspired from Heiser's background. And what got you into this? Tell us a little bit about the podcast.
Yeah, I think Heiser was connected the dots to make, I guess, to take the show from sort of an idea to actually have sort of a platform. I think that, back in like 2010, 2011, got out of the music business, was touring a lot, and was listening to a lot of paranormal stuff like Coast to Coast, listening to a lot of guys talk about Bigfoot stories and things like that. And it was just a different flavor for me personally, and then got really interested in the subjects. I loved it because it was so different, and then some theologians kept coming on shows here and there. And I'm surprised that Coast to Coast actually interviews a lot of theologians. A lot of Christians come on and tell their thoughts. Heiser was on Coast to Coast, and a lot of the guests we have on our show actually go on that show as well. And then around 2019, designed a logo because I thought, okay, there's something here. I'm not sure. And I think the Nephilim talk, and some of the guys that are willing, the theologians, talk about the Nephilim, really for me as a Christian kid, was just the gas on the fire of that conversation of like, okay, we need to sort of have this paranormal podcast, but it also is not afraid of the biblical concepts. And so Blurry Creatures was kind of born in the summer of 2020. I sent Luke a message on Twitter and said, hey, are you interested in this? Because he was tweeting about Bigfoot one day. And I thought, dude, we had a bunch of mutual friends and we loosely knew each other, and the rest is history. I think we started the podcast that summer, dropped it out there, and right away, I think when we did like a t-shirt pre-order and people were buying shirts, we were like, okay, maybe people listen to this thing. What is happening? Because I've never bought anything from a podcast before. So I think we kind of knew there was a little bit more of a fan base that I didn't see in a lot of podcasts. So it was a kind of a 10-year project, I would say, from listening to Bigfoot stories to, and I knew I didn't want to do it alone. And I knew that there wasn't a lot of Christian, I guess there were a lot of shows that weren't afraid of it seemed like there were a lot of shows that would get spooky, they'd get weird, but they would be afraid to talk about theological stuff. And there was a lot of shows that would get heavy into theology, but they would be afraid of the woo and the weird. And I think we just put those two together, and it was fun. It's fun so far.
Well, I've watched the show, or I've been tuning in for probably a couple years now. One of my elders here at the church introduced me to you guys, and I loved a couple of things. I loved the 80s theme. That's a big fan of that. But then also the fact that I don't know. You guys have sort of unilaterally coined the term blurry to describe all the sort of overlap of supernatural, weird, but then yet also kind of fits within the Christian worldview that Heiser has helped to expose, taking it
Yeah.
and put it on a popular level. Where did the blurry come from?
Yeah, Nate. I can answer this one.
Okay.
This is you though,
Yeah.
but it's really a Mitch Hedberg joke. It's not that complicated. It was Mitch Hedberg makes a joke about Bigfoot, and the punchline of the joke is that maybe it's more terrifying. The idea is more terrifying. There are blurry creatures running around as opposed to, because of all the pictures of Bigfoot are blurry. I butchered that completely.
Out of focus monsters.
Out of focus monsters. And so the idea that
Oh,
that it's
I've
just
watched
blurry.
that routine. Yes.
So that's
I love Mitch Hedberg.
Well,
every once in a while, one of our guests will get
Yeah.
the reference and be like, "Oh, I love Mitch Hedberg. This is a Mitch Hedberg joke." I'll be like,
Yeah.
"Good on you."
Well, I think if you're in the Bigfoot space long enough, obviously everyone's like, why is it always blurry? Why is it always blurry? If you're in the band space, everyone always says, come to Brazil. So it's one of those things where, there's just these little slogans in these little communities, and blurry is definitely one. And so, and I didn't want to pigeonhole the podcast just basically on Bigfoot. So Blurry Creatures was just, in the long run, it's been, usually people want to rebrand and rechange their name a little bit to kind of become what they are now. And I think we got really lucky. And also, all the domains were available. All the handles were available. So it's like, it's meant to be
That's a
every
win-win
single
right
social
there.
media channel and the .com. This is what it's called. I'm not even gonna bother trying to change it. So, yeah.
Okay, so I've got a viewer who's watching right now, and they're thinking to themselves, how on earth does theology, Bigfoot, and aliens somehow cross over with Nephilim? They're not quite seeing the intersection yet. So maybe you could paint a picture for us of what it looks like to produce this content. And I would imagine it's probably got an apologetic flair to it, and then it's giving answers for what these things are and helping Christians think through, I mean, what is taking place in pop culture? I mean, you've got, large government organizations doing investigations into, UAPs and those kinds of things. So like this is in the front end of media everywhere. So maybe you can kind of unpack what is the intersection of all this.
Well, good on you for actually putting those in different categories, because a lot of people just want to put them all in one. So that means you've already been down the road quite a ways. Because a lot of people yell at us like, "Oh, these are all the same thing," and clearly, when you get into the stories and you start looking at the data and the evidence, that they're not the same thing. And they're like different phenomena, and in itself, like Nephilim specifically, we can start there, I guess. It's just, the demigods of old, the cross between humans and their angelic parents. And so they had these giant offspring, and they had they were half and half, Bigfoot, I don't know. The stories are weird. What is Bigfoot? And then aliens, there are many different types of alien beings that people kind of see and interact with. And I don't know what those are either. Some of them are more human-esque. They look like us. They're blonde haired. Some of them are the typical Hollywood version of a gray alien with big eyes and big bulbous eyes and a big round head. So I think each of these is its own discussion. And obviously we have episodic podcasts about each of these particular creatures, but where it intersects with theology is, I think, the original question. The giants, the Old Testament giants that were running around. The David and Goliath story is just a micro picture of what we've come to discover as a huge narrative. All these ites running around in the Bible, the Canaanites, the Amorites. We try to figure out as much as we can about this, I guess, one of the major problems in the Old Testament, as Heiser would say, there's three major problems in the Old Testament, not just one. And I think we grew up listening to, there's just one problem in the Old Testament. And he says, no, there was this Genesis 6 event that really created a lot of issues. And so you had these hybrid beings running around, and it's biblical. And even other, like ancient books talk about these things too. So it's not just in the Christian space. So I think from there, we talked about, I guess giants would be considered a blurry creature. So that's why it kind of worked itself into our episodes and our podcast.
Well, I would say, like, from a macro standpoint, right? Like you're talking about things that are in the front page now, right? So this wasn't that way really until 2022 when we had
Well, 2017 is when they broke it.
Right, but then 2022 is when it really became main front page stuff. Let's talk about
You got these
UFOs,
house hearings and all of that.
Yeah, well, that's happening. That happened last week, right? This is stuff that's going on. So this is mainstream discourse now. I think initially what Nate and I wanted to do was, we're Christians, right? So there's a lot of stuff out there that's weird. In the Bible itself, there's a lot of weird things. Talk about the Nephilim, right? That was not something that you usually get a 5-point sermon about on Sundays. It depends what church you go to, but most likely not.
It should. Right? It should happen.
No, but I think what we want to do was make bigger fences, right? There's a lot of weird stuff in our world. People have weird experiences, whether it be like a paranormal experience, so out of the ordinary, or maybe they encounter a weird creature like a Bigfoot sighting, or maybe they have seen a UFO. If you're a Christian, how do you contextualize these things? How do you talk about these? And what I think, back to Michael Heiser, what I think Mike did was he said, there's an unseen realm. There is this very real, Paul says, more real than the things that we see. There's this very real realm that exists, that interacts with ours and overlaps with ours. And what if we were to talk about these things from a point of view of our faith, and include the idea that there's a lot of things we can't see and maybe don't understand, but biblically there is a theology and there's a precedence for explaining some of these things and talking about these things. I mean, we talk about looking for better answers, guys. Like, how do we talk about the UFO phenomena from a Christian biblical worldview? How do we talk about giants? How do we talk about these paranormal, quote, I don't really love that term, but it's abnormal, if you will, topics and experiences from a Christian point of view? Because frankly, like there's not a lot of churches out there that are gonna come at you with a UFO sermon on Sundays, because they want to keep people in the seats, right? And it's an odd discussion to have, but I do think we do ourselves a disservice as the church if we don't engage discourse and discussions around these things, because the world is more than willing to tell you what they think it's going on and what you should believe.
Yeah, Rogan's talking about it now, and so even Tucker Carlson
he's talking about it a lot.
A lot.
Yeah. And so I think it's just, the podcast medium is interesting because it's not like a church. You don't really have a lot of the fences there, or you don't have a lot of issues in terms of what you talk about. I think it's harder to talk about things in church because you just have a lot of people that get angry and mad, and you have committees and you have a lot of bureaucracy in the church that will, let's not talk about that. That's not really what we do here.
It does seem like that's changing. I think you
Yeah,
got
it has to.
what
Right? I mean, you have to. Otherwise, people are going to look for answers. I mean, you guys are pastors. I love this. Like, the fact that we're having a discussion with you guys and you guys pastor churches is amazing. This is what happened. Like, this is what has to happen.
My church doesn't know that I do this podcast, though. Yeah,
Well, okay.
I don't tell my church. They don't actually know that I do this. I'm
Whatever.
hiding. Actually, no, that's not true.
So you'd appreciate this, guys. Last night I covered Revelation 9, and we've been going slowly through Revelation, do a chapter at a time. And in this, there's one of the theories is that that Satan is the fallen star that's going to come and unlock the abyss and allow out this sort of demonic horde, left behind. Your pre-trib rapture dispensationalist guys will say, oh, the literal creatures. Whereas most of the amillennials will be like, no, we actually think that this is the unchaining of the watchers, that they're going to come back and proliferate evil on the earth, as Heiser talked about. And so to me, I think it's an incredibly relevant issue. If you're going to teach the scriptures and go through them entirely, you have to deal with these kind of issues. But the other fact is, it's popular. Like, I think Heiser did these surveys, or there were some Pew surveys and Pew research done on how many people actually believe that there is alien life, or how many people believe that alien life has visited us, or how many believe that these UAPs are, intelligent things that are real, that are observing us. And the vast majority of the church actually will sign off on all of it, but we have no polemic for any of it. So I love that you guys are wading into this space.
And Michael, I say that Mike famously said, and I love to go back to this, is that he would go speak at UFO conferences, and the reason he did that, he said, is that there's not.
I went to one.
They said there's not people that are more hungry for the gospel than people there, because they've already kind of crossed the Rubicon. They can already believe in like supernatural or paranormal, whatever you want to call it, things.
Yeah.
And they're looking for answers to this. And And so Mike Heiser would go and he would basically give the gospel presentation. People would come to Christ because they want to understand what's happening. They want to provide.
Well,
they need
they've had an
context for this.
experience.
Yeah.
I think a lot more people on our show who are pastors and authors have had an experience unrelated to the topic they're talking about on the podcast. So more people have seen a UFO or have seen a Bigfoot or seen something like this than you would imagine.
Or demons, or like, I mean,
Yeah.
Michael was talking about
It's
casting out a
popular.
demon. I mean, these are.
So what do you do with that when you have that experience? You know, you quickly realize who you can talk to about that and who you can't. And a lot of times you can't talk to the people you think you could. The people that are open-minded of some of the major concepts in the Christian faith are really closed-minded about other things. You're like, how does that happen? Where does that kind of work its way into the church?
Well,
But yeah,
we believe in a virgin birth. Okay, we
Two
believe
different-
in resurrection of the dead. We believe
Talking
in an axe head floating and a talking donkey. Yeah. This is no more fringe than any of the things we actually read about in the scriptures.
yeah,
Agreed.
yeah.
I mean, you're yes.
It's more of a Lord of the Rings story than any of us want to admit. And for whatever reason, you know, it kind of reminds me a lot when we do our show. It kind of reminds me of that movie, you know, Field of Dreams, when he's like, they're going to foreclose on you, Ray. They're going to foreclose. And they're all standing watching the baseball game. And he turns around and he goes, people will come, Ray. People will come. And you're kind of caught as Christians who've had a paranormal experience looking at the Field of Dreams. And then all these Christians come up to you and they're like, you're going to lose everything for this belief you have. And then as soon as as soon as the guy walks off the field, he's like, don't sell the farm, Ray, right? As soon as you have your paranormal experience, then all of a sudden it all makes sense. And so a lot of people don't have to have that, though. Maybe they just listen to a bunch of stories, and the fifth police officer to say, yeah, I was out there and I saw this thing and it was not a bear and it threw something at me. It's like, okay, I mean, I believe that people are having this experience. And so some people just have to see. Whatever their faith is, they just have to have an encounter. But a lot of people, I would say, believe the people that have had a weird paranormal experience and go, okay, so they can believe that data. So there's like a different type of personality, a lot of skepticism, a lot of rationality that intermixes with the church, and you kind of have to explore that.
Well, give me your alien talk. Okay, someone comes to you at church and they're like, I had an experience, right? I was in Arizona and I'm walking around and I see this, you know, thing, or you know, like a craft. And other times people are saying, you know, I had an experience where I was kind of awake, asleep. I'm not sure. I had this experience where I remember, you know, seeing this you know, alien-like being, and I was kind of paralyzed. And so give me your take. How do you have an alien apologetic? What does it look like to engage with people who are having legitimate experience? It's easy for me to talk to a person that has like DMT, right? Like, I did a DMT trip and I met spirits. I can look them square in the eye and say, I believe that your experience actually happened, right? I just question whether it's good, right? Like, it's real, but is it good, right? And saying that my Christian worldview makes sense of how you could commune with spirits using pharmaceuticals, right? Like, I can make sense of that. However,
Yeah.
how does a Christian engage with, I saw an alien? Like, what do we do with that?
Well, it's, what alien did you see? I would say the first question is like, what did it look like? You know, like we had Diana Pasulka in here. She's a devout Catholic. She's written a lot of books on this thing. And she's sitting here this week telling that she went to a crash site, picked up, and they dug in the ground and they found these pieces of this craft. And it's a wild thing. And her whole story of how she got into the UFO ufology subject was a wild one. And so I think with aliens, it's hard for a lot of Christians because they come to the table with sort of a preconceived idea that these are metaphysical. They're not. It's spiritual. It's demonic. It's a cloak, and it's an illusion.
Michael.
Yeah,
illusion.
it's an illusion. But then you have these stories of people pulling unknown metals out of the ground and holding them, or biologics, as we hear in the Congress statements and the testimonies. And then you have stories of Roswell, where there was multiple bodies inside these things. And then a lot of people are being abducted by the Greys on a nightly basis. And a lot of Christians will email us privately and say, thank you for talking about these things, because I've prayed many times and they haven't gone away. So there's some sort of human abduction, child or trafficking happening. So I think that's why the conversation is important. I don't know how to categorize.
Well, I know what I do. I mean, we have this conversation sitting around like a with my buddies smoking a cigar, talking about how do we talk about aliens. And I think for me, I always go back to I want to be pragmatic about it. So, what is an extraterrestrial by definition? It's something not of Earth.
Yeah.
So then, what is an angel by definition? Well, they're not earthborn; they're not of Earth. So you can start taking those things that there may be a parallel, and you go, what is an angel then? What does that mean? And what angel? It's from angelos, which is Greek, which just means messenger. So that is just a job title in the same way we talk about watchers. And then you kind of deconstruct these things. You go, let's talk about what angels do in the Bible. And what do? Well, they come and they eat with Abraham, wrestle with Jacob. They walk into Sodom. Daniel 9 and 10, they travel to Daniel and get held up by the prince of Persia. So you can...
Yeah, angels could be technically alien, I guess, if you...
Well, I mean, that's the idea, though. So you have
also...
these things not of Earth that seem to do very physical things. And so people are saying they have a physical encounter. Yeah. It's very hard to take that and be like, it's demonic. Demonic and evil, yes. Demonic as disembodied spirits, that's where our show is. You really can't go there. These things are doing physical things, whether it be abduction.
They seem to be embodied.
Yes, embodied, right?
Yeah.
So here's the thing, right? That's always... This is always the thing. There's a different phylum, and so what I say at a very basic level is like, what do we know about the kingdom of heaven? The Bible tells us a little bit about it. There's mansions, there's roads, there's walls. What do we know about manna? The food of angels is grain, right? It's bread. There seems to be a very physical aspect to the nature of what we're told about heaven. You take that with the physical, the scriptural physical nature of what angels do. Then I think we would kind of be remiss if we just thought that heaven was very binary in the sense of it's God and angels, and these angels just look like this and do this. Maybe maybe a creative God when there's millions of different types of flora and fauna here on Earth. Perhaps there's a bunch of different types of we call spiritual, but angelic heavenly beings. And we know a lot of them rebelled and fell. So when we have these things happen that are evil, demonic, people getting taken, these experiences with UFOs that are radiation burned, these things that happen that are we would call demonic in the evil sense. I think you can draw fences around our faith and say these things make sense if we just reverse engineer some of this and look at our faith and what does our faith say about things, angels, for example, that are here that don't that operate in what seems to be a very physical way. So you touch a gray and it feels this way. This is the stories we hear. Or you end up in a craft or a craft crashes, right? Or UAP hearings, there's non-human biologics like we covered. How does that work? Doesn't make sense. These aliens from another planet. Like I don't go there. I think our faith can explain a lot of this. I just think we think about it in a very medieval Leonardo da Vinci standpoint of little baby cherubs, in the Sistine Chapel. But the realities is that angels fell. They had babies with humans in Genesis 6. They did a lot of very physical things, and I believe at this point. I don't know if people Nate, but the UFO phenomena, the abduction phenomena, the alien phenomena is very physical, and there's a way to talk about that from a biblical worldview, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And we don't know the answer to these things, but I think these are breadcrumbs. If we look at what is the authority of our faith is the Bible, and as Michael said, there's a lot of weird stuff in there. I think we can start to construct a worldview that holds this and doesn't violate our faith. In fact, it reinforces the things that we read in our Bible and reinforces our faith.
I think
you gotta be more like a scientist wannabe. I think sometimes.
It seems like you guys have waded into these waters because you wanted to have some sort of explanation for what the vast majority of people are talking about these days. I mean, the fact that this last week, it was on Wednesday, they had a congressional hearing at the House of Representatives where you've got all of these guys who are sort of whistleblowing, talking about the UAP phenomenon, right? It's, which stands for unidentified anomalous phenomena. Did you guys watch this last week?
No, we were actually in an interview when it was going on.
Yeah, we were interviewing Dr. Diana Pasulka, who I was talking about a minute ago.
Yeah.
Oh, that's too bad. Okay, well, it's super interesting. I watched it all.
Yeah, some of that stuff is also very massaged and put out in the public in a very PG fashion too. So it feels like it can get even heavier, and they could put it on a little more steroids. But yeah, I mean, I think what I was saying a minute ago is like to come at this show like a scientist and say, what's the data? What are the stories? I'm not going to try to create a narrative. I mean, we see this today in modern science. We talk about this a lot, is that they have a narrative already, and then they go and they try to get the evidence to support the narrative. As opposed to true science says, okay, let's look, what is the data telling us? And it's really hurtful to a lot of pocketbooks, so they don't do science the way it's supposed to be. It's not that you're anti-science. It's that you just don't trust that people are actually doing science. And I think with the paranormal show too, it's easy as a Christian to have a lot of preconceived things that you've brought into the conversation that you're unaware of. And then you shape the stories how you want them to go and say, well, if this guy's telling the truth, you got to make room for that. What does that mean? And I think that a lot of people, because they come into this conversation thinking all UFOs and all ufology is just demonic deception. You're like, okay, well, what about the stories in the late 1800s? What about the some of these saints in the Catholic Church that write about having encounters with UFOs? That was a long time ago. So
wait. Okay, go there. I want to hear about this because I don't know about these Catholic saints having UAP experiences.
We just talked about this with Dr. Dan Basolka. I didn't heard about it either, but there's this. If you look it up, there's a very, very odd and strange encounter that Francis of Assisi, who we all know, right? I mean, preach the gospel at all times, right? But use words as necessary. He has this encounter praying on a mountain with what's called an angel, and all the art, the iconography is this beam of light that's coming down on him. And after this experience, he has all these injuries, what they call the stigmata. And the Catholic Church has done a little bit of a job kind of hiding or covering up what happened here. But according to Diana, who we just talked about this, she says that the writings of the guy that was with him claims that he actually succumbed to these injuries. And it sounds a lot like radiation, not an encounter with an angel, but maybe perhaps craft. And then what she talks about too is that
or the technology that the angel might have been in or whatever. What I'm saying? So it's like it's not like having an angelic encounter is necessarily harmful to the human body, but perhaps some of the technology that they have is. And there's all these other stories too where people have encounters and they have some sort of physical issue.
And she talks about what's called in the Catholic tradition an ascent event, where someone ascends or levitates.
Yeah,
and these are considered
the medieval mystics would do that stuff.
Right,
I can't remember her name.
But a lot of these. There's a subset of these. It feels like David Paulides, if you're familiar with David Paulides at all, Missing 411. Right, what he does is he takes, and this is I promise this makes sense for the discussion, but all these missing people, he takes a very subset of these missing people in national parks of that disappear without a trace, and then there's a more subset disappear without a trace, but there's nothing at all. There's no evidence at all. And then something bizarre happens, right? And so what she was doing, and this is the analogy, is she's saying there's all these ascent events, but then there's this portion that sound very much like what we would consider to be almost a modern day UFO encounter. So what do we do with that? Like,
it's not a modern phenomenon,
right? And that's always the thing. It's a modern phenomenon. Hollywood, programmed us and to think about this, and the movies said there's this, but this is actually an ancient thing. In fact.
Yeah, I think there's some, you can kind of look up some of these encounters and they would say things like airships. They didn't have the words to describe what they were seeing, right? They didn't see planes flying around. So we have some context on what to call this stuff. But I don't think people a couple hundred years ago had any idea what they were looking at. What is that? What is happening right now?
So you mentioned a moment ago.
Go
ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, it's not a new thing based on what we've heard and the evidence. It's not a new thing.
Okay, so many thoughts there, because part of me wants to rabbit trail through is it possible that we have a very science fiction based mind, and then we read these stories and then we transpose our experience onto these stories? We see this with eisegetical approaches to scripture all the time. Heiser chastises people frequently for trying to rationalize angels and saying like, oh, you're thinking, quantum physics, and you're trying to apply this to the Bible. The ancient Near Eastern authors are not trying to take their world. They're certainly not thinking of that. So we should not transpose that kind of thing onto that. So I'm curious if that's one rabbit trail I want to go down, but I think it might even be more helpful before we do that is to kind of tackle, because some audience members, people who would listen to us regularly, would be like totally tracking with what you're saying. Some others are going, wait, you said some Christians think it's demonic, but I keep hearing you saying over and over that you likely think that these are angelic beings,
It sounds
physiological
like they think
embodied
both,
beings.
actually.
Yeah, it sounds like they could be both. That's true. So to the listener, you are, I want to be very clear, I think, with your position in saying that angels are not, or fallen angel, or demons are not fallen angels, right? That's a category difference, that these are, the demons are disembodied spirits, and angels
Embodied
are spirits that can become embodied. Is that right?
Yeah, well,
Or they're always embodied.
that's always the discussion.
Spirits are spirits, right? Spirit is like, there are spirits in the Bible of, like, they think Jesus is a spirit on the water, right? A ghost.
Phantasma.
Yeah. So there are ghostly figures. Samuel, comes up from the dead as a ghost, or I don't know. The Bible talks about. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Peter's,
or
like,
unclean
they think
spirits,
Peter's ghosts at the door. So I think ancients knew what a ghost was versus what a demon is. The demons are a different spiritual being. So I think, yeah, it's a spirit, right? People have encounters with those things all the time. But an angel seems to have, it would make no sense to me personally if it just poofs into whatever it wants. It's like a shape-shifting genie. If it has to move from point A to point B, it can mate with humans, it can eat with humans, it can touch humans. It just seems like, what is an angel when it's not a physical being? Is it just a floating spirit that it's see-through? It's, you know what I'm saying? Like
Translucent, yeah.
So it seems like they have a substance that's different, like Jesus, even after the resurrection, right? He appears, like he either goes through a wall or he just appears. And you hear of angelic visitations. Jack Deere, my mentor, his wife, she had an angelic visitation where an angel literally just floated down from the ceiling, and then there was this exchange, and then it floated right back up and out. There was no harm done, not like what you're describing with some of these other encounters that seem like fallen angels. But they do seem to have a physical appearance.
That's how they describe alien abductions. The same exact thing happens. People will float through windows and they'll go through material things. So is it a type of technology that they have? That's all I think that's an easier way to explain these things. They might have access to just technology that allows them to do those things. Or they some sort of frequency or some sort of, it's built into how they can operate. But I think they're a thing. There's something when they're in their God created state. There's something.
There was a gentleman who came on our program named Gary Bates. You might be familiar with him. He talks a lot about UFO stuff, aliens, traveling through space. He does it really from a scientific kind of apologetic perspective. Gary, if you're watching, I'm not trying to throw any shade. I definitely would disagree with him on a few things. Like he said, if an alien showed up, and shook the hand of the president in the Oval Office, he'd throw his Bible away. And I'd go, I wouldn't do that. Anyway, all that to say that, like, he mentioned the case that all of these abductions, and he would say the majority of abductions are taking place with unbelievers. And that's why he thinks it's a demonic experience, because somehow believers are protected from this. Now, you just mentioned Francis, right? You've mentioned another Catholic lady that you've had on your podcast. Can you weigh into that? Are these demonic delusions, or do you think that this is happening to Christians as well?
I personally know believers that have been and maybe continually are being abducted, and that's a hard thing to justify, as you say, with
a lot of the guests on our show actually, and are abductees. People who come on and write books, and that's
a hard thing for a lot of people, right? The idea that people are being taken. I think what gives it credence, guys, is that this John Mack, the work of John Mack. He had 30 years. He was a clinical psychologist at Harvard, I believe. It was an Ivy League school. I'm pretty sure it's Harvard. And he basically got ostracized by his scientific community for looking at this, but he believed fully this was happening to people. He believed the people, and he has 30 years of data before he passed away of researching this phenomena.
Because he's interviewing people and they're all having the same experiences, right? And then he kind of goes, "Wait a minute, how's this possible?"
But to your point, though, I think it's we know of people that I don't think have any reason to lie. There doesn't make any sense why they would, and this is why I think, as we talked about the physical versus the spiritual aspect of it, there is anecdotal testimony that folks will try to rebuke these things in the name of Jesus, and it doesn't stop it.
Sometimes it does.
Sometimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't. And I kind of always akin to this of being like attacked by a bear or an intruder in your home, right? Like you could probably rebuke that person or that bear in the name of Jesus, and that experience could stop. I mean, that could happen.
Well,
but
and
because you're rebuking a physical thing, there's
no guarantee.
There's a whole different element than
well, and I would say that even with a spirit, you're not necessarily going to see it go. I mean, we had a guy last night at the end of our service. He manifested a demon in the service. And so we pulled him into the back, and so we could get him some privacy and so that he wouldn't be embarrassed by what this thing was attempting to do publicly. But they struggled. They couldn't get this evil spirit out of him. And you see the same thing happen with the disciples. Like they're trying to cast a demon out of a blind mute boy, and they're not successful. And so that's not terribly surprising to me. That
are you confusing the story? The boy is throwing himself in the water and the fire.
Yeah,
I think it's the one you're talking about.
Yeah. Sorry, the suicidal boy. But the point is that they weren't able to get the demon out of the boy. Their rebuke wasn't working. And so, that seems to apply across the board, whether it be a physical material being or even a supernatural spiritual being.
Good point.
Well, I think that we've gone.
Well, that point, that's a hard thing for a lot of people, right? There's this idea, I think, and you guys, I know you operate in the space that like, it's like this magic word process that just it does end a lot of things. Let's be honest. Like it is the highest.
There's power in the name of Jesus. Yeah,
100%.
Yeah, and I think a lot of ghost hunters who aren't Christians know that too. So there seems to be a legal protocol of things you can do. Like, let's throw the holy water on this thing and see what happens. Like sometimes, I think they know the rules of sort of the spiritual world, and you can manipulate those, or you can go as far as where you understand it's Christ's authority in you that's actually doing the work. But every once in a while, our ego comes involved, right? I think this same with Peter walking on the water. When he's looking at Christ, he can do it. When he's not, he sinks, because it's like it's easy to do these things, and then your ego gets involved, or your fear gets involved, or something happens and changes, and then it doesn't work. But yeah, there's a lot of Christians who listen to our show, and their faith is shattered when their other Christian friends say, "Well, you must not be a Christian then," because when I prayed, the abductions episodes stopped. And the problem with the abduction stories as well is abductees only remember the beginning and the end of the abduction episode. So they might be starting to levitate, and then they pray in their head or out loud, and then they go back down. Well, they think it's stopping, but then they realize it's not. It's continuing to happen year after year after year. So they get discouraged. They lose their faith, or they get upset, and it's a very psychologically difficult thing to overcome and to process. And so it's hard enough as it is to deal with this stuff and try to convince your wife or your friends or your whoever that it's happening, and then have all these Christians just tell you, well, you have weak faith, so that's why it's happening to you. So
I think similar to abuse
it's not very pastoral.
in the church. You see people that experience all kinds of sexual abuse, spiritual abuse in the church. When they try to bring their story forward, there's always some way of discrediting them. Like, you're just bitter and wounded, or they it's like they concoct these stories when these whistleblowers have very little to gain from doing this. And the statistic, at least with women who come forward with stories of sexual abuse, I think it's like 90% of them are telling the truth. Well, way more than that are being discredited.
Let me ask a question. You mentioned that you had a friend who had experiences like regularly, and the claim is that these things are physical experiences, not visionary, not a dream state, that they're physical. I mean, part of me, maybe this is just like a skeptical thing. Like, I'm not trying to throw shade at someone who's had this experience for sure, but like, just take a camera in your room, like, right? Like, if it was physical, you could capture it, you could measure it, right? And then like, maybe it is something that you really physically believe happened, but is a kind of a psychotropic like event. Like I've had visionary experiences as I've woken up and didn't know whether I had the experience while I was awake or asleep. And Paul mentions a man, whether he was awake or asleep, I don't know, right? Like, he is kind of in this in-between state of like, I kind of came to, I had an experience I won't go into detail of, but I'm sitting up in bed. I have a visionary experience. of a being. Anyway, that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
Anyways, I see this thing, and I don't know whether like after the experience, I kind of shocked to awake, but like I'm in the exact same position, sitting up in bed. So like maybe what these people are experiencing, they believe is physical, but could it not also be a dream state or something visionary?
I think all the above is happening.
Yes.
I think that sometimes it is. Sometimes when people do DMT or drugs, they're probably accessing some sort of a view of it. We just did an interview on astral projection, and sometimes it feels very much dreamlike, and then sometimes like the CIA was trying to see if people could go from one place to another in some sort of in the astral, and then sometimes people end up in animals flying around. Are they in the animal? Like what happens there? I don't know. But then like we talk to people all the time who they'll have physical pregnancies go missing. They'll be pregnant, they'll be taken, and then they're not pregnant. What do you tell those women? Oh yeah, that's all in your head. That's just a thing you're envisioning. Well, I had a baby in me and it was growing and now I don't. And the doctor doesn't know what the heck happened. So that happens. So they are doing some sort of breeding program. And some people go as far as to say this will be the mark of the beast, that they are developing a genetic mark of the beast and they're testing it in people. And we just interviewed L.A. Marzulli last week talking about these biological implants. He took one out of someone's leg. So what is that? So you can have these sort of fences, but then if you do a show like this for long enough, some story is going to blow it apart. And what do you do with that? You can say that person's lying, this is all made up, or it's true. And we got to move the field a little bit further back and make room for this story. So like we get into the physical conversation all the time on our show because it continues to happen where you see a footprint. This is a Bigfoot track, right? It leaves this track here, right? This is the infamous Patty footprint. And what is walking out in the woods at night leaving these tracks? And it's leaving tracks, right? But then there are other stories where it disappears. So it can do both. So all the above seems to be the best answer. People don't like that. But you could take a lot of topics and you can apply all the above, like the moon landing, for example. All the things that people say could have happened at the same time. They could have, you know what I'm saying? Like, so some people could be having a spiritual encounter with like a mental manipulation, and then other people are actually being physically taken into craft. And
because there's people that come back with injuries and like implants
exactly.
and bruises and scratches and that could also be poltergeist stuff, right? So I think this is the crux of the show, guys. Is like, how do we get better answers? Like, I don't know what the answer is. I just you.
But you can't kill.
You're just trying to be honest about the data.
100%. Like, so you believe people you try to really, like anything else, right? It's about discernment. You try to take each story and take a look at people's, what are their motivations? What were they trying to sell something? Are they trying to push a book or grow a show or whatever it is, or what if they have no reason to tell you that or lie to you?
We're sitting next to Diana Pasulka, and she's got her family in the audience, and she's saying, I picked up a piece of UFO wreckage.
Well, she's basically, I didn't want to believe. Actually, I was a big skeptic until they put this in my hand.
Yeah.
So you kind of,
what do you do that? Somebody, you're sitting next to somebody who's touched UFO wreckage, and you're like, are you completely making this whole thing up? And you're also a professor at a college. So you have a lot to lose by making these claims, right? That's wild, being one away from someone who's touched the stuff.
But I mean, I think we're not like too rigidly married to the idea that we could be wrong about a few things. I mean, that's part of this.
Probably wrong about a lot.
I mean, but and our idea here, honestly, guys, is like to create a space where we can have discourse, right? Like the idea of free speech in and of itself is that you have a free exchange of ideas, and the best ideas come to the surface. That they survive the discourse in speech. And for us, that particular space lives within our biblical worldview and our Christian faith. So we have discussions about this, and we try to take, with our best discernment, do we believe everything on our show that people come on? I'd say no, absolutely not. Like sometimes I'm like, I can't go there. I don't know if I don't believe that.
But then a couple years later, you can go there. So that is interesting.
That's a wild paradigm shift too. Yeah, it's
how many stories you have to hear of demonic possession before you realize, oh, that's real, that's happening. And then you start to become somebody on the offense and getting them out of people. And there's still a lot of Christians who don't even believe that. They don't even believe that demons are getting into people, and this whole thing is just a mental health issue.
Or miracles. That's a great one. Miracles is always one. People don't think miracles happen anymore because it ceased after the disciples and the apostles, right? But I know you guys have just talked about it, and
we don't believe in that stuff. John MacArthur says it doesn't happen. It must not.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's okay. You guys will get there. You got time. No, I just think you look at places where people draw the bar, right? And
why can't both
you just
things
want to remove
be
the bar and see what's possible? I get it.
100%, right? And it's okay. It's okay that some of the stuff you're like, nah, we'll throw that out. I can't go there.
It's really hard to stay objective. It's really hard as a reporter, as a news person, or any. Obviously we see the news is not objective anymore, but it's really hard to stay there. Like, I don't know. Tell me your story.
Did
people shut down?
I know you guys had him on your show.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Well, I was going to take this in a little bit different direction. I know that you guys have had Heiser on your show a few times. I know you've had Doug Van Dorn. They had a little thing called, I think it was called Fringe Pop, if I'm not mistaken, where they kind of tackle some of these questions. But one of the things that Heiser was saying, Pure Normal, that's what it was. From what I recall, he was saying that a lot of these abduction stories, they resemble like ancient Canaanite ritual abuse. That there's like really eerie similarities between these kind of things. Have you guys heard any of this, or am I just making this up?
I mean, we've heard things specifically. I don't know if about kind of in that ballpark of sort of sex magic and other things that they were doing.
Though, Michael, if you think about it, right? If we believe that the gods of old and the Watchers and then also, of course, Deuteronomy. If you're in the Divine Council, Deuteronomy 32 worldview camp, where Yahweh takes Israel to Himself and divides the nations among the Elohim, then you essentially have a fallen angel that's sort of that, or an angel, the point who then falls, who is in charge of Canaan, and in charge of these different tribes, right? So nothing's new under the sun. Nothing's new under the sun. We know this to be the truth. So the idea that things happened then, underneath sort of the jurisdiction, the realm of a fallen angel, and then we see similarities now. Just looks maybe a tiny bit different because you got fresh marketing on something, in 2024. I mean, I don't remember. I don't know if personally I remember Mike talking about this, but I could see how that could make sense.
And I think that's why we had a flood. I mean, we have this major catastrophe that happens in the world, and I think it's because we were seeing a level of depravity where angelic beings were influencing humanity to do things that were beyond human sin level,
beyond the veil,
crazy
or pale,
corrupted, and so it just needed a complete reset. Because otherwise, a lot of Christians walk away from their faith when they get to those stories because they're like, "How could God command this to happen? Why would He flood a world?" Well, if you have human beings, almost genetically corrupting themselves, you got to do something.
Well, I've got a question on that because you said human beings genetically corrupting themselves. God wipes out the animals too. So I'm curious what you think about, you got like Bigfoots, you got Loch Ness Monster, you got, what's the El Chupacabra sucking the blood out of people. Yeah, I was going to ask the question about chimeras. Are you in the space where you're like, hey, I think either there was genetic mutilation, genetic testing on animals trying to create things, or that it was, as gross as that may sound, some kind of, in the same way that angels were leaving their natural relationships and cohabitating with humans, were they doing the same thing with animals? And anyway, these creatures, are you inclined to believe that there are potentially physical creatures on the earth that are mutants of this kind of activity?
Definitely then, obviously. I mean, they're on all the books. I mean, people talk about the satyrs, fawn, all these different chimerical creatures that I think are more than just mythology. We could talk about mythology for an hour and a half, but we've interviewed people who've seen them, ran them over with their car. I've interviewed a police officer hit the goat man, and it almost rolled his
I need to see that interview. I don't remember that one.
It was wild.
And then people seeing centaurs on their farm and other weird things we get sent to us. So, and this is modern day stuff. I don't know. I definitely think it was highly possible.
Well, the Bible says all flesh was corrupted, so
Yeah.
there's a lot of space for us to think, maybe a lot of these mythological creatures weren't just weren't just pop art at the time. Maybe these things did exist and were part of the abomination by which God drew the line and said, no more, we're not doing this. This experiment is ended.
Yeah, rebellion is like take anything God makes, take anything that God has created,
and corrupt it.
And we see that the modern day times of just like a male and female. Like, let's do anything we can to delineate this and fracture this into a million pieces. Why wouldn't, and that's just something that we can do as an idea, or take, these concepts and pervert that. So I think these entities, they were perverting anything and everything. Maybe that's where we get modern drugs, certain psychedelic plants. Maybe that's where we get histories, Greek history of all these weird creatures. But I definitely think the world was corrupted in an unimaginable state. And even then, they still had over 100 years to kind of get it right and repent. And sure, the rumors of these things are still out there. I mean, the dog man, the goat man of Texas. I mean, it's like people still see the weirdest stuff.
I would say this to you guys is like there are giants after the flood. Goliath and his 4 brothers, King Og of Bashan, all of a lot of the tribes in the conquest of Joshua are mentioned.
Post-flood giants, How did they do it?
So then is some of this stuff happening again? Sort of this, and maybe this is where, like, I know what you're getting at. Maybe this is where we're getting like the Bigfoot creature. Is it some kind of weird angelic science experiment? I think it's a kind of a good answer. It could be. No one's bagged a body that we know of. People have shot it. We've had people on the show that said they killed it, but no body comes out of the woods, and that's a weird phenomenon. Especially
it's a big body
when you marry that with all of the weird things like it disappearing, it doing like telepathy, and take what you will from that. Like sure, every one of those people could be lying, but the likelihood that they all are lying is very, very small. So there's something very weird and strange about this creature. We know that. We talked to trackers. The one I think about is the Navajo Nation, and we talked to a ranger on the Navajo Nation who tracked one, and the footprints disappear. Famously, this is what happened with the Yeti in the Himalayas. The footprints just stop.
My favorite Bigfoot story is someone just saw the feet walking and no body. Whatever. Make sense of that. I don't know. Yeah. It's like the rest of its body was gone. It's just the feet.
They were big though.
Yeah. So it's just bizarre. You do it long enough and you don't know.
It's fun, guys. Hey, we're at that time. It's 5:09. We've already gone.
What did we do with these guys on the show?
I'm going to land the plane, and I just saw a pair of feet walking. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and call that a wrap, guys. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Remnant. No, seriously. Thank you guys for coming on. This is an interesting crossover where we're talking about things that we often touch on our program when it comes to things like the unseen world. We did an episode recently on chimeras, talking about Heiser and Doug Van Dorn and those kinds of interviews that we've done on the program. I bet we've had Heiser on, I don't know, 4 or 5 times.
3 times, I think.
At least.
What a blessing. What a guy. I mean, Mike was a special guy. A very humble but very special guy. It's
dude, he was super down to earth. He was a lot
of
fun
isn't
to
he?
talk
He's
to.
football with us most of the time. Not really talk about divine counsel. It was funny.
He would email me in band cars, like when someone would ask for an interview, and he's like, "Hey, are these charismatics like stable?" He would send us emails going like, hey, "Are these safe charismatics to talk to?" And band cars sometimes would be like, "No, I wouldn't." So it's nice. It was nice to hang with the guy, and he wrote forwards to band cars book, and I don't know. He was a real dude. But I think people should go back and enjoy both his writings and podcasts because he did great service to the body.
At some point, and I know this probably isn't going to happen. We got to wrap up now. Both Josh and I got to get going home. But at some point, I would love to talk to you guys about the overlap of my own experiences with the demonic. I mean, I'm seeing this stuff every week. I'll do a deliverance conference and just see crazy things happen. I mentioned this guy that manifested last night that the people in my church weren't able to get him set free, not yet anyway. But I'm seeing this stuff all the time, and this is that unseen world that is very real in the time of Jesus and very real in my own life. And And I'd love to know how that crosses over and get your thoughts on some of the stories that I've got. So perhaps one day we'll do another blurry crossover.
No, we'd love that. Pick a few of the wildest stories,
and
that's what people do on our show.
Come sit in here.
Yeah,
come in here. We'll do it.
We try to bring on the wildest stories on our show, just because I think there's a lot of the same. And I think sometimes we try to flex people's minds a little bit. Like, okay, you've heard all the stories, but have you heard this one? This one will make you scratch your head. And I'm an ADD kid, so I like new and fresh and weird. And I think that's a lot of the show. And some people, Christians, get mad at us because it's like, hey, we started this talking about Bigfoot. That's sort of always been the staple of what we do here, And I'm not going to shy away from my Christian faith, but not every single show is like, I'm not going to force it on to the guest or on to the audience. It's just like, it tries to happen as natural as possible. But we'd love to hear some wild stories on blurry stories. We're always welcome.
Yeah, come on down.
Podcast.
That's fun.
Thanks for having us, guys.
Yeah, thanks.
So appreciate the invite and to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. I've got a basketball game I got to get to. My son's playing across the street. So
Carpet League.
Go team.
Yeah, that's right. He's also riding the bench. No, okay. Guys, thank you so much for tuning into this program. We'll see you guys next time. For those of you who are watching, subscribe. Go over to Blurry Creatures on Spotify. You guys are on YouTube, but you guys don't have your video stuff on YouTube, do you?
Just launched.
Yeah, just launched. I'd seen this.
Yeah. We're going to start rolling out full video episodes in the new year. Got a little teaser up there. We're getting the hang of it. But yeah, you can hit us up on all the social and YouTube. Yeah, we're there. Run over there, hit them, get them subscribe, all that fun stuff. And for the rest of you guys who are watching, I thank you for jumping on the program. Dive into the link of the description, get on the newsletter. You get to know when we're coming out with content like this. Our show notes where we're creating content, all that can be found on Patreon. All that fun stuff and more can be found in the newsletter. We do conferences, courses, and tons of extra Patreon content. So jump in the newsletter, get all that discount promo code and fun stuff. And then the Logos link as well is in the link of this video as well. So if you guys want to start your free Logos software, that's a great place to start. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Blessings.